So again, I'm Evelyn, and this is Angela. We're going to be talking to you about this bird right here. This is a ranguru, also known as the Chatham petrel, and they are native to New Zealand. And we're also going to be talking about some of its friends as well. They're having a little bit of trouble. They're endangered, so we're going to be talking about them and how we can help them. Our cameraman is actually going to be handing out some crossword puzzles and some scraps of paper. You guys can jot down anything that you see in our PowerPoints, like underlined words. Underlined words, if you see them, write them down and write in the answers on the crossword puzzle. Some of them you should know, some of them maybe you don't know, and we can definitely answer the questions in that sense.
And for those of you who participate, there may or may not be some little prizes at the end.
So we do have some prizes. So, okay.
So I was told you guys are in 9th grade, right?
Yeah.
So you should have been exposed to this idea of the fact that not everything has just one name. That any organism, everything that we know of in this world doesn't have just one name. So our friend that we're talking about today, the ranguru, that's what is locally known as. But also, this bird lives on the island of Rangitirra, right? And it's also considered the Chatham Islands. And a petrel is the kind of bird. So that's a more generalized name, right, than just ranguru. And then finally, I kind of wanted to know if y'all have discussed like scientific naming and if you know about genus and species and stuff like that. So we went ahead and included the Pterodroma axillaris, which all of those are always really hard to spell, but that's the way that you know basically worldwide what bird we're talking about or what organism we're talking about. So I kind of included a little key. I'm sure you guys have talked about it. I see some stuff up here in your classroom too. Can anybody here maybe give me an idea of what my little key would stand for as far as scientific naming?
Listing of the definition.
Exactly. So the last two then, like I said, are the genus and species, which we have here. The Pterodroma is the genus, and the axillaris is the species.
Okay, so in the first slide I mentioned endangered species, and according to dictionary.com, an endangered species is a species at risk of extinction because of human activity, changes in climate, change in predator-prey ratios, and the like, especially when officially designated as such by a governmental agency such as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So perhaps you all have heard of other endangered species. Just a few of them are the Bengal tiger, the blue whale, red panda, the snow leopard, and African elephants. And each year, this endangered species list goes up. So right now, the current number for endangered species is actually 16,306. That's pretty big, and that's not even including other critically endangered species. And the cute little bird at the beginning is at risk of becoming extinct.
So to dig a little further into the whole becoming extinct versus endangered versus critically endangered, there's this cool website that eventually, hopefully, you guys will see either in your classes later on or something that you could do at home if you have a passion for animals or have concern about any animal that you know or heard of that's endangered. You can go on something called the IUCN, which we have listed in parentheses there, and it is the International Union for Conservation of Nature. And this IUCN has something called a red list, and you can literally Google IUCN red list. And if there's an animal or a plant or a bug or a fungus or anything else that you think might be endangered, you can actually type this in there, and if there's information on it, you can hear about this. So as far as our friend, the ranguru, we wanted to say that there's actually only 200 birds left, and that puts them in the classification of, at the time, this was actually in 1990, there was only 200 birds left. This puts them in the classification of critically endangered. So they no longer are just considered endangered where they can kind of still work on their own, they can kind of still live on their own. This group has now reached a point where more than 80% of their population is gone. And there's less than 250 adults. That's part of the IUCN's classification. There's less than 250 adults. So they can't, there's only 250 adults. We don't know if they're male or female, right? And we don't know if they can mate, we don't know if they can breed and have babies and continue their species. So as far as critically endangered, which is what our petrel was, They have to be living also in less than 10 kilometers, and there has to be an obvious decline with each generation, which can be as little as 3 years. So the next generation, that one generation, they might have had 50 young. The next generation, they'd only have 40. The following, they'd only have 30, and so on. So here we wanted to point out something called fragmented or fragmentation. That's also a key word, guys. So as far as fragmented, that idea has to do with kind of all over the world, people and natural occurrences come in and will cut off areas of natural habitat. So no longer is there this space where, like this grand big space where animals can move and live and do what they need to do. Now there's a road that cut through them and they no longer can cross that road. You can't expect a little snail species to be able to cross the road, or maybe a flightless bird to go across the road. So in bigger forms, that also includes cities, that includes our neighborhoods, that includes if there's a natural disaster and an area is struck by lightning and now nothing can be in that area because there was a fire. All of those things contribute to something called fragmentation. And I'm sure you know what habitats are, just areas that the animals are living. And interestingly, as far as this bird, and it's going to come up later, with the very few breeding adults, they also only lay 1 egg at a time. So this is not something that's gonna, they're not gonna have a bunch of babies like spiders do, right? They all have bunches of them, carry them around, they grow up, they can move on. They have 1, and if something happens to that 1, it does not make it to adulthood.
Okay, so how did this happen? How did they get to this point? Does anyone have any ideas about why they're endangered or why they're critically endangered? Yes.
Their habitats were destroyed.
Exactly, that's a huge thing. Due to humans and climate change, one of the big things is invasive species. Now, invasive is like a non-native organism that kind of moves in and can be harmful to the environment and the habitat, or the species, okay? So, in this situation, our ranguru is in competition with another bird called a broad-billed prion. And they're also native to New Zealand, and there's a lot of competition going on between them because their nests kind of compete with each other. For instance, like the prion will come and try to take over the nest of the ranguru, and sometimes they throw out the babies and they prevent the mating pair from coming back and caring for the babies. So there's that in breeding. Again, she said they only lay one egg, so it's very hard for them to, have enough young. We have some cartoons here. They can't speak for themselves. These birds, they can't come and say, hey, I need help. So we need to be able to help them.
So additionally, with the habitat destruction and then actually our invasive species, the broad-billed prion, there's over 330,000 of those competing, taking the home of the 200 petrels that we're talking about. So these birds will actually, they're burrowing. So the petrels and the prions are considered burrowing birds. So they like to be in the cool, they go underground, they're nocturnal, and so the prion will not only just kick out some eggs, it will hurt eggs, it will also kick out any age young, even if they're just about ready to fledge, just about ready to go and be bigger birds. It will also hurt the adults. They will fight for that space. And so now they're not only hurting the babies and preventing them from growing up, they're preventing the adults from getting back and potentially hurting them, making them unable to fend for themselves as well.
Also, I have one more quick note on this PowerPoint. There's a lot of mammals and plants that are invasives as well. It's not just the prion that's coming in conflict with these rangurus. A lot of people come to these islands and they introduce other mammals such as like feral cats and stuff like that, and they also kind of take over their environment, and the ranguru, it's really hard for them to remain a stable population because of it.
Yeah, they live on the ground, and then these pigs and cats come in and just like take them out. Like, oh good, there's a burrow, I'm hungry. Okay, so this is kind of the last little bit about this guy, I think. We won't go through all of these, but this is where humans can come in, and instead of damaging, they can actually help. And this is where these researchers, this paper that we got about this bird, they came in and they wanted to help save them, right? So it's not just show up, give them some food, maybe swat some birds away. This is a big project that takes lots of time and money, and this specific project took over 10 years. and I have some questions for you when we're done about this. So the researchers need to get out there, they need to get into the woods and forests and all the land and make sure that they can set up a safe space for themselves that doesn't actually harm the habitat. There also needs to be something called banding. And now banding, I think you guys would like, because I know when I was y'all's age, and even now, I love when I can go out and actually like touch wildlife and be involved and get hands-on. And so this is the part where they actually would go and collect the birds one at a time and put little metal bands around their ankles that didn't hurt them or anything like that. And in order to limit, because they want to limit the animal's exposure to humans as well, they don't want to change them. So what they would do is they'd put a little piece of little paint stripe on their heads to show from far away, oh, we've already done that bird. And it would last pretty much the time that they would be out doing the captures. They would go ahead and paint on the bird's little head and go ahead, and that way they wouldn't go back in and recapture the bird and put it under more stress and do more damage. So this is also considered tagging, which I know has a different meaning here in the States, but it really is, you're putting a tag on the animal to make sure that they are checking to see if it lives to the next breeding season, to make sure that it's grown, or if it's gotten smaller, they weigh them, they make sure that this bird is still continuing on to the next generation to hopefully give them more babies. One thing that they also have to take into consideration when doing stuff like banding is that the females are not under too much stress. So they make sure that if they have to know the timing. You can't just go out there and do it. You have to go and say, oh, that mama bird is actually nesting right now. We don't want to disturb her nest. We don't want to add more stress to her and her life. So researchers have to do a lot of work, but it is very rewarding in the long run. As you can see, there's a bunch of other stuff. They defined the burrows where these birds lived. They used something called artificial burrows, and they tested a couple different ways. One was made from plaster and mud, and they just kind of made a little dome over a little hole, and that worked, but they ended up choosing to use plywood boxes. And these plywood boxes were easily lifted to check and then put back down. They were biodegradable, which is great for the habitat, and it was pretty well insulated, so the birds didn't have a lot of exposure to the elements. Eventually, though, once money starts coming in, they wanted to save money, and they've moved on to plastic boxes. Now, these plastics are still going to be considered plastics that can be recycled and that they take away when the birds have become more independent, but at the time, they've insulated, they did the work, they just had to keep more track of, make sure that they weren't exposing the habitat in the area to too much plastic. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about is translocation. And this is a super important thing for pretty much all of conservation. If there's this habitat that we're talking about, there was one habitat on one island with 200 birds left. So if something happened to that island, if something happened to that area, if something happened to that one population, they would be extinct. At that point, there really weren't any in captivity that we had known about. And so they would be gone, that would be it. So what translocation is doing is taking the chicks to another area, and actually they found some preserves in New Zealand that prevented the predators from coming in and taking their homes. And they hand-raised these chicks in this area, feeding them a combination of oil and sardines until they were big enough to do burrows on their own. So they built a second population in an area that may not be as affected by weather or the same weather problems. Finally, they did one more, and that was in 2000, I believe. No, 2008, so not too long ago. They moved 200 more chicks into another preserve. So now we've got 3 populations, and that's a really good forward motion that these researchers were able to do to give these birds a chance to continue to live.
So did the project work? I would say it was pretty successful, yeah? They were able to relocate these chicks, create different burrows for them. They went from having those 200 individuals to having 1,400 of them. But the only thing is, because they were having so much trouble in the beginning, like, do you think we can just leave them? Do you think they're just gonna, grow? Yeah, like they need more help. They need time and years and money from us to help them to continue this project. For instance, like here's kind of a little analogy. If you have a car and it gets really dirty, you can take it to get it cleaned, but it's just gonna get dirty again. You kind of have to keep helping it along throughout its lifespan. It's just gonna get dirty again. So I thought that was really cool, and the project is far from done. We still have a lot of things that we need to do for these birds, and I think we can do it as long as we just have the money to find them, to find ways to do that.
As far as the critically endangered, it says here from critically endangered to endangered, that movement upward on that IUCN red list is now it needs to end up being more like 2,500 adults. Now it's a range, and it has to do with their fragmentation, if there's only, you know, a small population in one area but a larger population in another, and how many individuals total. But because it's spread over several different populations, the 1,400 birds, it was allowed to move up into the not critically endangered. There's a hope that if we can continue to do this, that bird population can eventually become self-sustainable and they won't need us anymore, but it's not quite there yet. So I had the really cool luxury of knowing a researcher who's in New Zealand today doing research on other birds. And the thing about New Zealand is it's an island, it's a small area, right? I mean, if we've all, hopefully, maybe I'm dating myself, but we've all seen at least Lord of the Rings, right? Hopefully The Hobbit, right? Anybody? That area is kind of wild and wildernessy, but it's very small. And so pretty much from what I've read, I think it's 90% of the birds in that area are considered endangered, if not worse. So I have a friend out there who's doing research on something called the keki, and they're working to maintain genetic diversity. So they're going a step further, not just building habitats, they have to make sure that this bird, there's so few of them. I believe they're working with the last 90. There's so few of these birds that they have to now make sure that they're not inbreeding so much that they cause problems. I don't know if you guys have talked about inbreeding or know anything about that. We actually do it a lot here in the States with like dogs and cats. And it's a problem when their genes, their genetic makeup is just a little too close. So I want to talk about pedigrees. Have you all worked on pedigrees at all? So then you kind of know what that is. That's one way to start, right? That's how they can kind of figure out who's related to who on a visual scale. Like, can we interbreed these birds and not these birds? Keep them as far away as possible. Additionally, there's genetics and genomics involved. Now, I'm pretty sure you guys have heard of genetics. I don't know if you've heard of genomics, and there is a slight difference. Obviously, they both are dealing with genes, but in genetics, it has to do with nucleotides. Have you guys worked on nucleotides? Do you know anything about that yet? Yes, maybe? Nucleotides, and it's literally just the A, T, and the flip-flop, and how individual nucleotides are switched. But with genomics, it has to do with the whole DNA structure. So now we've gotten onto a bigger picture, and these researchers are working right now to make sure that the kaki can try to continue on its species without interbreeding too much and causing bigger problems in the long run.
Do you want to show the video of the research right now?
We can see.
So here are some of the other birds that are endangered along with the ranguru. I'm going to use this little pointer. This guy over here, he's the kakapo parrot. That's hard to say. And its name means owl-faced soft feather. And he's really big actually. It's the world's only flightless parrot. This
It
guy
actually was considered extinct and came back. That's
Yeah.
one of the ones that's considered extinct, right?
Yes. This is actually New Zealand's state bird, the kiwi. It spends its time in underground burrows, and it's extremely territorial when it comes to its young, and they can live up to 50 years old. That's really impressive for a bird. The next one is the kaki, which her friend is working on in New Zealand. It's this one right here. It's also known as the black stilt.
You can see the band on his little ankle too.
It's a wading bird, and there are only 100 birds left in the wild for these guys. It does not migrate, and that's probably prohibiting some of its breeding, actually. The plover down here, or the New Zealand dotterel, they can walk on the day they are born. Actually, I thought that was really neat. You know, most birds have to spend a couple weeks before they can fly from the nest, and their parents will actually pretend to be injured to lead predators away from their nest. So they're little smart guys. This really colorful bird over here, the takihi, they can't fly either. so pretty. They kind of look like a little peacock there. They lay 2 eggs, but only one of them survives.
Why doesn't one survive? Like
Just because that's how competition goes. One of them is stronger than the other, and they end up just overpowering the other one. Yeah, it's interesting how large.
How does that happen? 'Cause you're saying that they go into like competition, but how does that happen if they're eggs?
Well, when they're born. When there's
Okay.
2 eggs are laid, and then when they're born. Sorry, I should have been a little bit more clear, but when they're born, only one of them survives because the other one overpowers the other one. So we have some videos for you guys here. Do you want to do one of them on the research?
Sure.
The funny one?
Yeah.
We'll watch the whole thing though, This one talks about inbreeding, what she was talking about, the genes being kind of close together, and how they prevent this.
And this is actually the researcher I was talking about too. Yeah.
I'm a PhD student at the University of Canterbury, and I researched the black stilt, or kaki. So kaki used to be found on the North Island and the South Island. They're braided river specialists, so it's not a species you can put on an island in New Zealand, a small offshore island. It has to be in the mainland braided rivers. And their decline was mostly due to habitat loss and the introduction of mammalian predators, so stoats, cats, hedgehogs. There are less than 100 left, and they're dependent on a captive breeding program where you have individuals brought into captivity, raised in captivity, and released back into the wild. And an important component of that is looking at the relatedness of individuals when you pair them up. This is very similar to matchmaking, kind of like the show Married at First Sight. Instead of looking at personality types of the birds, we look at how related they are to one another, the end goal being to choose distantly related birds to pair so that we reduce inbreeding, and we also maximize diversity in the population so they can adapt down the road. So I'm trying to find the best way, most effective and efficient way to pair up kaki. And we're looking at the pedigree, or a family tree, to estimate relatedness. We're looking at DNA markers, either genetic tools or genomic tools, which look at thousands of markers, to find the best way to pair up our kaki. And the end goal is to apply this information to the kaki recovery program to help recover the species. But it's also applicable to over 20 captive breeding programs in New Zealand and over 400 around the world.
How do I see?
Or which one? Yeah, that's fine. We can just do the last one about which one?
Oh yeah.
This one? So the kokako, that was the bird that was kind of
The big weird parrot thing.
there's a picture.
Oh no, I was wrong. Was it the macaco? No, this was a different one.
Yeah, this guy, they're kind of on the search to see if he's actually extinct because they hadn't seen him for a while. And there's actually a huge reward out for people who see these. A $5,000 reward for someone who thinks that they've seen them. So if you guys want to go out and get money, go try to find this bird. And
We got plenty of these here in the United States too. There's a lot of endangered species here. So if you like taking pictures, you want to go out in the wilderness, be safe, wait till you're adults. But you could go and have some fun and maybe make some money.
exactly, it's cool.
All right, so I'm gonna take this.
Our founder, Herman de Vries, was inspired by technology.
And then just like. So we wanted to finish this with just kind of an overall, we took you from the specific with our bird with the chafing petrel, but we wanted to remind you guys that conservation is not just in New Zealand, it's not just in the United States, it's worldwide. So according to Google, preservation, protection, or restoration of the natural environment, natural ecosystems, vegetation, and wildlife. That is conservation at its core. And so I kind of wanted to pose a question to you guys, and I wanted you to write your answers. If you wanted, you could, and you don't want to like speak out, I'd like you to write your answers on the little spare sheet of paper we gave you. And I want you to take a minute and decide if you think saving these birds is worthwhile. I mean, sometimes there's only 90 or 100 of them left, is it worth the time and money? And neither answer is right nor wrong. It really is just like to let us know what you think, because we want to know kind of where kids are at, young people are at. Additionally, we wanted to ask you, and you can answer this right afterwards, just put a 1 and 2 next to it. What can you do to help conservation efforts in your community? So I understand sometimes we feel like, even in college, sometimes we feel like our reach is only so big, and we're working in a conservation class. Is there anything, now that can be something as simple as recycling or bringing your own water bottle to school, all the way to making donations, to helping research in the summer. Anything you think that you could do in your community, we would love to know what you think could promote conservation locally, since we can't necessarily travel to New Zealand and go and hug cute little birds. So I also, while you're doing this, I was going to walk around and see if anybody has written pretty much anything on your page. You're welcome to have a little, write something down, and then we'll pick up your papers at the end. And I was going to see if you guys wanted any candy.
And if you guys are interested in knowing the answers to the crossword puzzle, I do have them.
There are some Snickers in here. I've heard a lot about allergies in school. There's other stuff, but I just want to make sure if anybody's got an allergy to be aware. Does anybody have any questions at this point about what we showed you? No?
Yes, I do.
Oh, go for
How
it.
did first people know that the mother was like nesting?
Usually they exhibit signs, and it's different with every bird, so I couldn't necessarily tell you with this bird, but it has to do with burrowing and, no thanks? No? Okay. It has to do with burrowing, and it has to do with whether or not they're exhibiting nesting behaviors, and most birds will do stuff right before they're about to lay their eggs.
Yep.
How is their absence of feathers? Like their web, like
That's a really good question. They, have you guys touched on like trophic levels and how every organism is kind of integrated into their environment? Well, if we lost this bird, chances are that the ecosystem would change. Like there would be direct impacts, there would be indirect impacts. We don't really know. There's some animals that just go extinct and nothing happens. So we don't exactly know if they would, if the environment would be impacted hugely. I mean, another bird could come up and possibly be that bird for the island.
Does anyone have any questions on the crossword puzzle? Is there anything that you couldn't solve? There was some I think I didn't underline on the PowerPoint. So.
never underlined?
Everything was? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, most of the answers were in the PowerPoint. So we're also leaving some candy for Teacher Appreciation Week next week.
Yeah. What happened there? Ms. Dan, can we get points? We did on the home. Yeah.
So everybody got their crossword puzzle filled out? Or the ones that wanted to anyway? Okay, so I would like to come around then, or no, you're still writing? People are still writing their responses? Not on your crossword puzzle. You should write it on your spare sheet. Oh, perfect. That's okay. We can hand you another one. Anybody who's done writing, you can keep your crossword puzzle just because I kind of want you guys to have them, recycle them. Anybody else need a spare sheet of paper? No?